Hey guys, it's Jake here with etrailer.com. Today we have a 2018 GMC Sierra 2500 and we're going to be taking a look at and I'm going to show you how to install the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 airbags. A prime example of why you should get a set of airbags is right behind us. We have a truck here that tows a fifth wheel camper and the pin weight on it is about 2,000 pounds. That is a lot of weight pushing down on the bed of this truck. So adding a set of airbags, they will sit in between the axle of your truck and the frame, and they're designed to take some of the weight so that your vehicle suspension doesn't have to do all the work. When the vehicle suspension is overworked, it will cause sag in the rear of the truck, which makes driving conditions not very fun. I have a set of airbags on my truck and I love them. What it does is it helps to add some of that control back to the front end of the truck. When you've got a lot of sag in the back, your headlights come up off the road, your front suspension relaxes, which is what that loose steering that you feel, and it can cause sway. If you've got too much weight on the back of your truck, that front end is going to travel more than what it should. Now, when you're looking at other options for suspension enhancements, you're gonna have things like sumo springs, which are not adjustable, timbrins, which are also not adjustable. You'll have Roadmaster active suspension, which is essentially another type of spring that gets mounted to the top of your leaf spring pack. That is adjustable, but you have to have a tool in order to adjust it. If you have a set of airbags on your truck, the sky's the limit. You can adjust it down to the single PSI of how comfortable you want your ride to be. Now, right now, we've got about 50 pounds in our bags, which is way too stiff to drive around with without a load in the bed. And if you leave that air in, the back of your truck is going to feel like riding on a ton of bricks. But if you let it out to that recommended, that 5 PSI as your lowest PSI, this truck, being a 3/4 ton, is going to ride just like factory. Now, this kit is going to come with 2 manual inflation valves, which is great because you can adjust one side or the other. A lot of people will have uneven loads in their bed, so they can put, say, 20 PSI in one and 30 in the other, or vice versa. Something I highly recommend is getting a onboard air compressor. They're not difficult to install. It's just a power and a ground wire, and then you run your air lines back and mount up your compressor. That is going to allow you to get the most out of your airbags. This particular owner of this vehicle opted not to get a compressor because he's only going to be using these airbags for his camper. And he's going to set it at the same PSI every time. But the one thing that people don't think about is that when he gets to the campsite, if he has to run to the store, he either has to dump the air out of his bags and try to find a compressor to air them back up, or he has to ride around town on a ton of bricks. It's up to you. I know a lot of people that do that. They just deal with it for the weekend, but adding a compressor is really going to allow you to adjust it. Once you unhook from your camper, you can let all the air out of your airbags, drive your truck as normal. When it's time to hook up on Sunday, you can hook back up, pump your airbags back up, and never have to get out a compressor or whatever you have to air up your airbags. Now, when it comes to the installation, the bracketry is all going to be custom fit to fit this truck. There is one part which happened to be the most difficult part about this installation, is mounting up the top bracket or the top of the air spring pack. There's 2 different ways to mount it up on this specific truck. The one way is going to be the way that we did it, which is drilling 4 holes in the bottom of your frame rail, and then using these self-tapping screws that come in your kit to lag it to the bottom of your frame. That is the application that you'll have to do if you have a gooseneck or fifth wheel hitch installed in your truck bed. The other way, if you don't have either of those hitches, is to use 2 U-bolts. They run over top of the frame rail and then bolt to the top of the bracket. The one thing I would say, if you're going to go through this installation and you think you might ever want to put a gooseneck or fifth wheel in, I would go ahead and do it the way we are. It is the harder way, but if you ever decide to put either of those hitches in, you're going to be covered. You won't have to take your bracketry back apart and then do it the way we're doing it. So that's just a piece of advice from me. Do it now so you don't have to do it later. With that being said, let's go ahead and pull the truck in the shop and show you how we did it. To begin our installation, we'll drop down our spare tire. And we'll have to remove this heat shield temporarily. We'll use a 13mm socket in order to do so. Set this aside. Next up, we're going to have to pry out our factory jounce bumpers. Typically, you can take a long pry tool or a screwdriver. You shove it up there in the gap and then twist it. Usually pops right out. If you're having trouble getting it out, usually you can use a little bit of spray lubricant or soapy water in order to pry it out. Now we'll have 3 13mm bolts that we're going to have to remove to loosen up our brake lines, because our bracket's going to have to go behind this. We'll have one here, one on the opposite side on the passenger side of the vehicle, and then just on the passenger side you'll have one on the other side of the axle. And one last thing we need to remove is this 13mm bolt that's holding our brake line in place, our emergency brake line. We've taken this out, and then what we're going to do is we're going to have to relocate this. So you want to pull this out and just let it hang down for now. And we're going to relocate that because it's going to get in the way of putting our airbag assembly up. Now we need to get our airbags assembled. We'll start by taking one of our airbags with the valve portion sticking up. The other side is only going to have 2. What we need to do is set this plate on top, thread in our valve here, hand tight. Then we can take an 11mm wrench. Wherever you start it, you want to go one time all the way around, back to that spot, and then a half a turn. And that is more than tight enough. You got to be careful because these are brass fittings and you can strip them out. Then we'll take our top bracket. It can only be mounted one way. Your valve is going to sit right inside this notch. Set it on top. We'll take 2 of our flathead screws, our bolts. We'll thread these in by hand to start with. There we go. And then we're going to tighten and torque these to the specifications in the instructions. Now we'll take our airbag assembly, flip it upside down, grab our other cap, set it on top, and now this opening that you see right here, you want that portion of the bracket, the bottom bracket, to be facing your valve. So I got the valve facing me, and we'll set it just like this. We'll do the same with those flathead screws. Now we're ready to mount up our airbag. But before we do that, what I like to do, something extra, is I like to push down on this, push all the air out. What you can do in your kit, you can take just the slightest bit, it doesn't even have to be this long, but you need to just tape one end of it off. And what we'll do is we'll push all the air out of this bag, set it on the ground, push all the air out, and essentially we're just making a plug to hold that while we get it up and in place. If you try to put this in with the airbag full of air, or fully extended, it's going to be very difficult to tuck it up and in place. Now, one thing you definitely want to do before putting your airbag in place is lift up on the hitch of your truck. You can do this with either a floor jack or whatever kind of device you have. If you're using a lift like we're using, you can use a pull jack to push up on the back of the hitch. Essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to separate the frame from the axle more to give us some more space, because the airbag is going to take up most of the space. And we'll take our airbag assembly, tuck it up. There's a couple different ways you can do this. I think I do it a different way every single time. It's just how it works best with a truck. But set it up there maybe tuck it under, pull this bracket out so you can fit it in place. There you go, that worked out well. So now what we can do, with it sitting on top of this perch, we need to let the air out so it makes contact with our frame. Just push in on the airline, push this little collar in, and pull out on the airline. There's going to be two different ways you can mount up the top of this bracket. The first way is going to be a U-bolt, which is the easier way. You slide it up over top of the frame and it comes down through the two outer holes in our bracket on both sides. Because we have this factory fifth wheel in here, our prep package, we can't use that because the bracket on the other side is too close to the top of the frame to slide the U-bolts over. So the kit will come with self-tapping screws. They're more like self-threading screws, so when we install them, we're gonna have to run them in and out in order to clean out the threads. But what I'm going to do is you want to put this up in place, pull it over till it touches the back of the, or the back side of the bracket touches the mounting point for our jounce bumper. And I'm going to take a marker and mark a spot on our frame in the center of that hole. I've tried to drill out these holes with the bracket in place and it is not fun. So we will put a mark here and remove the bracket so that we can get these drilled out. Now with our two holes marked, we can come back with a pilot drill bit and drill out two pilot holes, and we'll eventually work our way up. I'm going to use 4 different sizes to work up to a 5/16 hole at the very end. What we can do next is we will, since our holes are drilled out to 5/16, we'll take our bolt. I always put a little bit of penetrating oil or some thread tap on it to give it some lubricant when it's drilling out these holes. But we'll run it in so it gets tight, and then essentially what we're going to do is we're going to run it up, run it back out, run it up, run it back out, and you just want to clean off. You want to clean off these. There's a little slit in the bolt. You want to clean that out anytime you pull it back out. Once you get it all the way tied up against the frame, we'll back it all the way out. Do the same thing with our other bolt hole, and then we can put our airbag back up in place and run it up. You can do all these steps, drilling it out, putting these bolts in with the airbags in place. I did that on this side. I've done it on several other kits. It's just so much easier to get these holes drilled and tapped out without the airbag in your way. Now you can see why we took the airbag out, because if you're trying to tighten this side over here, it's very difficult with that airbag in the way. And we'll come back and torque these down to the specifications and the instructions. Now for our lower bracket, we'll take these large carriage bolts, slide them through, make sure they seat properly. You want this curvature here, this cutout, to be on the bottom of the axle. Slide our carriage bolt through, followed by a washer and a lock nut. We're going to do the same thing for this other one. Now you want to come back and tighten one at a time till it's even on both sides. And you can kind of see, measure the distance between here and here and on the other side. You can usually eyeball it, but you just want to get it close. And we'll come back and torque each of these down to the specifications and the instructions. Now you'll want to repeat that same process on the other side of the vehicle. On this side, it can be kind of tricky to tuck it in and around the exhaust, but if you use that technique of pushing it down and getting the profile smaller, you should be able to fit it in no problem without having to move the exhaust. But with both of them secured in place, we can take the smallest bolts that come in your kit. You'll have 3 of them, and these are for to reattach our brake lines to our brackets. Last thing we need to do before we get our air lines run is use the included bracket with the this emergency brake line. We're gonna have to mess with it a little bit here. We'll get it around it, and then we'll need to get it attached to this piece of our bracket with a bolt. Next thing on our list is going to be running our air lines. Your air line is going to be one continuous line in your kit. It'll come with 2 of these Schrader valves on the ends. So just hold it in half, and then we'll take this, cut it in half, and we can run one at a time. What we're going to do is we'll go ahead and run it. We'll come back and show you how we ran it. But essentially, we're just going to make our connection and then follow factory wiring along the way and come back to near our license plate where we're going to mount our valves. What you want to do though when you're starting this is we've got a pretty straight cut there now, but you can see it's a little slanted actually. So you just want to get a straight clean cut. Now the way that we ran our air lines is we connected it into our air fitting on top of our airbag, ran it up, followed factory wiring, zip tied along the way. You want to keep from kinking this hose, so you want to run nice round runs. If you have any extra, I like to leave it just zip tie. We just have one circle here, and then ran it up and out and attached it to the license plate. On the passenger side, we have the exhaust to deal with. You will get a heat resistant shield or a sleeve that'll go over the airline, then insert it into the bag, run it up, again, very smooth curves, run it up, over, zip tie it along the way, then put a small loop in it, and again, back out to our license plate. Now, the way that we did this is we just took the bolts out of our license plate, and it makes for a really clean installation because then your air fitting is right here whenever you need it. So you can do it however you want. A lot of people will put like one here and one up here. I personally, on my own truck, I put mine right here and right here, so it's down by the hitch. Everything else is down there. But it's really up to you. Wherever you want to put those fittings, you can put them there. We've had people put them in the gas tank too, where you open up the gas tank and there's 2 fittings sitting right there. It's totally up to you. But to get our airbag protected from the exhaust, it's about 4 inches away from it here. They do give you a heat shield. You have to bend it yourself. So we'll put a 45-degree bend on it there and another 45 there. The same thing here. And you just want it to be able to sit flat because we're going to be putting it right here. And this is going to protect the airbag from the heat from the exhaust. So we'll take our ring clamps that come in our kit, slide them up, and get them tightened down. There we go. Now with everything from our kit installed, we can put some air in the airbags. We usually try to put about 50 PSI in them. And then we'll come back under here and we'll spray some soapy water on each of our connections, which in this case, you just have the one at each of the airbags. And then we always like to test out the back of the Schrader valves at the rear of the vehicle just to be sure the factory connections are okay. Now that we've got air in our bags, we'll spray down the fitting. And what you're looking for is large or small bubbles to rapidly form, and it'll form right where the hose goes into the air inlet. If you do have that happen, all you have to do is pop that airline back out, make a clean cut, and stick it back in. Now that we know that our connections are good and everything's properly installed, we can throw our spare tire back on and our heat shield, and that'll do it for our installation. Well guys, hopefully this video helped you decide whether or not the Air Lift LoadLifter 5000 airbags are right for you and your 2018 GMC Sierra 2500.